Hey everyone, welcome back. I appreciate you taking the time to listen because today, I have a story that nearly shattered my marriage. But as painful as it was, it also opened my eyes in a way I never expected. It changed how I see love, commitment, and, most importantly, myself. My name is Logan, and for years, I thought I understood my marriage. My wife, Sienna, and I had been together for several years. We built a life together, shared experiences, and, like any couple, went through our fair share of challenges. Nothing had ever seemed out of the ordinary, at least, not at first. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? I thought that was just part of being with someone for the long haul. But looking back now, I realized there were red flags I ignored. Not because I was blind to them, but because I didn't want to believe they meant anything serious. That's the thing about manipulation, you don't always recognize it when you're in the middle of it. It sneaks up on you, little by little, until one day, you wake up and wonder how you got here. It started subtly. Every time Sienna didn't get what she wanted, she wouldn't argue or complain. She wouldn't even say what was bothering her. Instead, she'd go silent, emotionally shutting down like a door slamming in my face. At first, I thought she just needed space, that maybe she was upset and working through it in her own way. But the more I paid attention, the more I noticed the pattern. This wasn't random. This was calculated. If I ever said no to something, whether it was a simple request, a decision, or even just a difference of opinion, she would pull away. And it wasn't just about physical affection, though that was a major part of it. She'd act cold and distant, like I had suddenly become invisible. Conversations became clipped, her tone went flat, and it felt like I was living with a stranger instead of my wife. At first, I didn't think too much of it. Relationships have rough patches, right? Maybe she was stressed, maybe she was overwhelmed, maybe it was just a mood that would pass. But then I started noticing the pattern, how quickly her mood shifted the moment she got her way. The second I caved, everything would go back to normal. She'd be affectionate, warm, and engaging again, as if nothing had ever happened. It was like flipping a switch. The realization hit me slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Sienna wasn't just shutting down emotionally because she was hurt or upset. She was using it as a tool, a way to manipulate situations without ever having to raise her voice or start a fight. She never needed to demand anything outright. She never needed to argue. All she had to do was make me feel like I was losing her, and I would do whatever it took to make things right again. And for a long time, I played right into it. I convinced myself that keeping her happy meant keeping our marriage strong. If I just gave in, if I just gave her what she wanted, things would stay peaceful. And honestly, I hated the tension. I hated the way the house felt cold and heavy when she was like that. So, I'd do whatever I could to bring back that sense of normalcy. I'd reassure her, try to make her smile, and sometimes, I'd even change my mind about whatever she had wanted in the first place. And every single time, the outcome was the same. The moment she got what she wanted, she was back to being the loving, doting wife. The sudden shift was almost eerie. One minute, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the next, everything was fine. She'd laugh, touch me affectionately, and act like we hadn't just spent days in icy silence. But something inside me started to crack. I was exhausted. I was tired of feeling like I had to prove myself, like I had to earn my own wife's love. It was draining. Marriage wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to feel conditional. And then, one day, it all came to a breaking point. For weeks, Sienna had been talking about a designer bag, some limited edition, absurdly overpriced item that, in her mind, was more of a necessity than a luxury. She wasn't just excited about it, she was fixated. She talked about it like it was something she deserved, not something she hoped to receive. I never had a problem treating her. I'd always believed in making her happy when I could, whether that meant little surprises or bigger gifts when our finances allowed. But this time, it wasn't just a request. It wasn't even a hint. It was an expectation. And that was what rubbed me the wrong way. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she pulled out her phone again and showed me the same bag I'd already seen a dozen times. The screen glowed in the dim light, the price tag glaring at me like a warning sign. My birthday's coming up. This is the one I want, she said. There was no excitement in her voice. No hopeful anticipation. Just a quiet certainty, like she had already decided that it was going to happen. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't sure what it was, the way she said it, the way she looked at me, or just the weight of all those years of manipulation pressing down on me. But suddenly, I saw everything clearly. This wasn't love. This wasn't partnership. This was control. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to play along anymore. The way she said it wasn't a request, it was a declaration. Her voice was firm, like she wasn't just asking for something but finalizing a deal, locking it in as if my answer was merely a formality. I glanced at the price on her phone screen. It wasn't completely out of reach, but it also wasn't the kind of money I could just throw around without a second thought. It was expensive, one of those unnecessary luxuries that, while nice to have, wasn't exactly a priority. I took a breath, steadying my tone so it didn't come off as dismissive. Sienna, I know you really want it, and I'll get it for you. Just not right now, I told her, keeping my voice neutral, measured. I wanted her to know I wasn't shutting her down, just asking her to wait. I figured it was a fair response. A reasonable one. I wasn't saying no. I was just saying not yet. But to Sienna, not yet might as well have been a flat-out rejection. Her expression changed in an instant. The subtle shift in her posture, the slight downturn of her lips, it was like watching a storm roll in. Without a word, she let out an exaggerated sigh, a performance in itself, and tossed her phone onto the couch like it had personally offended her. And then, silence. A thick, suffocating silence that filled the room, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating her next move, deciding the most effective way to punish me for not immediately giving her what she wanted. Because that's what this was, punishment. This was her way of making me regret not caving in the moment she asked. And then, just as I had predicted, she snapped. Because you're saying not now, like that actually means something. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. I exhaled slowly, keeping my composure. Soon, Sienna. I just need to handle a few other things first. It was the truth. It wasn't like I was refusing. I simply needed to prioritize. But to her, that wasn't enough. Forget it, she muttered under her breath, pushing herself up from the couch and walking off toward the bedroom, leaving me sitting there, staring at the blank TV screen. I didn't move for a while, just sat there in the dim glow of the room, my mind replaying the conversation over and over. When had we gotten to this point? When had every conversation turned into a battle? When had compromise stopped being about understanding each other and instead become a test of control? I should have seen it sooner. The signs had always been there, but I had ignored them, convinced myself that this was just how relationships worked. That if I gave her what she wanted, if I avoided conflict, things would stay peaceful. Looking back, that night was the first real sign of what was coming. Later, after I had gone through my usual routine, I finally made my way to bed. The room was dark except for the faint glow of Sienna's phone screen. She was lying on her side, facing away from me, scrolling through whatever had her attention at the moment. Normally, this was the time of night when we'd naturally gravitate toward each other. Nothing major, just small, simple gestures, an arm draped over her waist, the warmth of her back against my chest. Just natural intimacy. The kind of closeness that should happen without effort. But the second my arm touched her, she recoiled. Don't. One word. Flat. Emotionless. I blinked, taken aback. What? She didn't turn to look at me, didn't soften her voice. I'm not in the mood for anything, she said, as if I had just crossed some kind of line. I wasn't even trying to initiate anything beyond a simple touch. But that didn't matter. This wasn't about being in the mood or not. This was punishment. A deliberate, calculated move. I swallowed down the frustration creeping up my throat and kept my voice steady. I just wanted to hold you. Well, I don't want you holding me. She still didn't turn to face me. Her voice was sharp, final, like she was slamming a door in my face. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me shift. I had seen this before. Every time I didn't give in, every time I set a boundary or disagreed, this was the outcome. The cold shoulder. The silent treatment. The withdrawal of affection like a parent disciplining a misbehaving child. And for years, I had played along. I had been the one to apologize, to reach out, to fix things. Because deep down, I just wanted things to feel normal again. But this time, I saw it for what it was. This wasn't love. This wasn't a disagreement between partners. This was a power play. And I wasn't going to beg for affection. Not anymore. Something inside me hardened. I made a decision that night. A quiet, unspoken one. I wasn't going to play this game anymore. Instead of wasting my energy chasing after Sienna's approval, trying to win back her warmth like some kind of prize, I turned that energy inward. In the days that followed, I started to reclaim parts of myself that I had let go of over the years. The things I had once enjoyed but had gradually abandoned in the constant effort to keep her happy. I began filling my time with things that had nothing to do with her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in years. Freedom. The guitar that had been sitting in the corner, gathering dust for years, was the first thing I picked up. My fingers felt clumsy against the strings at first, but as I strummed, the familiar rhythm started to come back. I had forgotten how much I loved playing, how it used to clear my mind in ways nothing else could. Then, there were the books, the ones I had abandoned halfway through, stacked on the shelf like forgotten promises. I pulled one down, sat by the window, and let myself get lost in the pages. No distractions, no tension, just me and the words, the way it used to be. And then, there was the gym. I had always liked working out, but somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about me. It had become another way to seek Sienna's approval, to look good, to be attractive, to be worthy. But this time, I wasn't doing it for her. I wasn't doing it for anyone. I was doing it because it felt good to push myself, to feel strong, to reclaim something I had lost. If Sienna didn't want to talk to me, fine. If she didn't want to be around me, fine. I wasn't going to chase her. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix things. I wasn't bending over backward to get back in her good graces. I was simply letting things be. And that shift? It happened naturally. I was done giving all my energy to someone who only gave me the bare minimum when it suited her. And then something interesting started happening. Whenever Sienna had her friends over, I no longer faded into the background like I used to. I didn't just sit there, waiting for her to acknowledge me or include me in the conversation. Instead, I brought my usual charm, my humor, my energy, not for Sienna, but for myself. I made an effort to truly engage with the people around me. If one of her friends got a new hairstyle, I noticed, and I told them it looked great. If someone cracked a joke, I didn't just chuckle. I laughed, added to the conversation, kept the energy going. I made eye contact. I listened when they spoke, nodding, reacting, asking follow-up questions. And you know what? They responded. They laughed at my jokes. They pulled me into conversations. They genuinely enjoyed my company. At social gatherings, I stopped hovering around Sienna like a satellite stuck in her orbit. Instead, I became a presence in my own right. I wasn't overdoing it, wasn't forcing anything. I was just there, present, engaged, making sure people felt heard and appreciated. And people gravitated toward me. And Sienna? She noticed. She wasn't used to seeing me like this, relaxed, confident, effortlessly drawing people in. She wasn't used to me not looking at her for approval, not waiting for her to decide when I was allowed back into her good graces. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one chasing after her. I was just being myself. And suddenly, that version of me, the one she had overlooked, the one she had taken for granted, was in high demand. Sienna had always been confident in her ability to control the situation. She knew how to manipulate the dynamic, how to pull me in when she wanted me close and push me away when she needed to remind me of my place. But this time, I had shifted my energy elsewhere, and it didn't take long for her to realize that she wasn't the center of my world anymore. At first, she didn't seem too concerned. She probably assumed I was just sulking, going through some phase, waiting for her to decide when things would go back to normal. But then, she saw me effortlessly connecting with her friends. And something in her changed. Because now, it wasn't just me who was noticing the shift. Her friends were, too. They started lingering around me more, cracking jokes, pulling me into conversations in ways they never had before. Some of them even reached out to me directly, instead of going through Sienna like they used to. And that caught her completely off guard. One evening, we were at a small get-together at a mutual friend's house. The energy was light, fun, one of those nights where the conversations flowed effortlessly, the kind where you could lose track of time just enjoying the moment. I was sitting across from Sienna, talking with a group of people when I cracked a joke, something quick, offhand, but just witty enough to land perfectly. Haley, one of Sienna's closest friends, laughed a little too hard. The kind of laugh that lingered just a second longer than necessary. And then, as if on instinct, she playfully touched my arm. It wasn't anything serious. A brief, casual gesture. But it was enough. Enough for Sienna to tense up. I saw it in the way her posture shifted, in the way she suddenly wasn't as relaxed as she had been just moments before. Her grip tightened around her glass, her expression unreadable. And then, the kicker. Another one of her friends, Brooke, grinned, and looked directly at Sienna before saying, "How come your husband is so much fun? I feel like I don't even know this side of him." The words hung in the air for a beat too long. And that was when I saw it, the first flicker of something in Sienna's eyes. Not anger, not amusement, but realization. For the first time in a long time, she was the one on the outside looking in. And she did not like it. She didn't say anything, not at first, but I could tell she was paying very close attention now. The change was subtle, but it was there, lingering in the way her eyes followed me across the room, the way her laughter faded into silence whenever someone else was engaging with me. She wasn't just watching me anymore. She was studying me. And then, things took a turn. One night, another one of her friends, Alyssa, nudged Sienna playfully and said, "Girl, if you ever get tired of him, send him my way." It was a joke, obviously, one of those light-hearted comments that were meant to be harmless. But Sienna? She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Instead, her face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip tightened slightly around her drink. Over the next few days, Sienna became more observant. I'd catch her watching me at social events, her eyes scanning every interaction like she was mentally dissecting every conversation, every smile, every laugh. When I spoke, she listened, but not in the way a partner does. She wasn't engaged, she was analyzing, like she was looking for some hidden meaning behind my words. She was waiting for a misstep, waiting for proof that she was losing me. And then, one night, I walked into our bedroom to grab something and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, my phone in her hands. She was so focused on the screen that she didn't even hear me come in at first. Her expression was blank, her brows slightly furrowed in concentration, her fingers scrolling with precision. The second she realized I was there, she froze. Then, just as quickly, she placed the phone down beside her, like she hadn't just been going through it. The funny part? There was nothing to find. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't cheating. I wasn't sneaking around. There were no secret messages, no suspicious activity. But the fact that she even felt the need to check, that told me everything I needed to know. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. And it was eating her alive. Her frustration only grew from there. The more she searched for something suspicious, the more irritated she became when she couldn't find it. She wanted an answer, a reason, for why I wasn't clinging to her approval anymore. But there wasn't one, at least not the kind she was hoping for. I wasn't playing some game. I wasn't trying to get back at her. I had just moved on. Then, one evening, I came home from work and saw her standing in the kitchen. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then, I really looked at her. She wasn't in her usual oversized t-shirt and sweatpants, the comfortable loungewear she normally wore when she had no plans to leave the house. No, tonight was different. She was wearing a fitted dress that hugged her body in all the right ways, her hair styled neatly, her makeup light but deliberate. She wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't expecting company. She had dressed up just to be home, and it was clear she wanted to be seen. Then came the shift in conversation. Out of nowhere, she started making an effort to talk to me again, asking about my day, reacting to my stories, laughing at things she normally ignored. She even started throwing in compliments. One evening, as she set the dinner table, she glanced up at me and said, "You've been looking really good lately." It was casual, almost offhand, but I knew Sienna well enough to understand what this was. A test. Before, I would have seen a comment like that as an invitation, a way to reconnect, to move past the unspoken tension between us. But this time, I just nodded. "Thanks," I said, keeping my response casual. And I left it at that. I knew what she was doing. She was testing the waters, seeing if I'd take the bait and slip back into our old dynamic. The one where she dictated when I got attention and when I didn't. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. Then, something I hadn't seen in a long time happened. She started cooking my favorite meals. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence. But then it happened again. And again. 3 times in a week, to be exact. And that was when I knew. Sienna wasn't the type to suddenly become a doting wife without a reason. She had never done things like this without expecting something in return. But I wasn't biting. I still talked to her. I still sat at the dinner table. I still responded when she spoke. But I wasn't chasing her. I wasn't acting desperate for her affection anymore. And for the first time, she was starting to understand what it felt like to be on the other side of the push and pull dynamic she had created. My attention was no longer something she could demand on her terms. It was something she had to earn. And so, she tried harder. She laughed at my jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. She leaned in when I spoke, nodding, reacting like she was genuinely interested. But the thing was, I saw through it. This wasn't real. She wasn't doing this because she wanted to be close again. She was doing it because she wanted to know that she could. She was trying to get a reaction, trying to make me acknowledge her effort so she could feel like she was regaining control. But I didn't owe her that. And for the first time, she was the one chasing me. But I held my ground. For the first time in our relationship, I could feel it. She was the one feeling uncertain. The shift in power was subtle but undeniable. It was in the way her gaze lingered on me a second too long, the way she hesitated before speaking, the way her usual confidence faltered. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, fully at ease, when she walked in. She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she just stood there in front of me, wringing her hands slightly, like she was gathering the courage to speak. And then, in a quiet voice that carried far more weight than the words themselves, she said, "I miss how things used to be." I looked up from my phone, met her eyes, and set the device down beside me. I didn't respond immediately. I just waited. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her fingers fidgeting as if she was struggling to get the words out. That in itself was telling. Sienna never struggled with words. She always knew exactly what to say, exactly how to frame things in a way that worked in her favor. But this was different. Finally, she took a slow breath and admitted, "I feel like we're distant." Her voice was careful, measured, as if testing the waters. I kept my expression neutral, still saying nothing. I wanted to see where she was going with this. After another hesitation, she finally moved, lowering herself onto the couch beside me. Her shoulders were tense, her posture stiff, like she wasn't used to being the one in this position. And then, in a voice that was just a little too quiet, a little too vulnerable, she asked, "Can we talk?" That was it. That was the moment. The moment I had waited for. The moment she finally acknowledged that something was wrong. For so long, she had treated our relationship like a game, moving the pieces exactly how she wanted, setting the terms, deciding when I was worthy of affection and when I wasn't. And now? Now, she had lost control of the board. I wasn't going to rub it in her face. That wasn't the point. I just needed to be honest. I exhaled, leaning forward, resting my forearms on my knees before looking over at her. "I love you, Sienna," I said, my voice calm, steady. Her expression didn't change, but I could tell she was listening. Really listening. But I'm done playing games. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I could see it, the conflict in her eyes, the battle between instinct and realization. I kept going. If you want affection, it has to be real. Not something you hand out when you get what you want. That's not love, Sienna. That's control. And I'm not doing that anymore. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came. Instead, she dropped her gaze, her fingers twisting together in her lap. For the first time, I saw hesitation in her. Doubt. I softened my tone just a little but kept my words firm. This marriage isn't about control. If you want to be happy with me, we both need to stop treating each other like competitors. I paused, giving her time to absorb it. Then, with more finality, I added, "I'm not your opponent, Sienna. I never was." Silence filled the space between us. But for once, it wasn't tense. For the first time in a long time, we weren't playing roles. We weren't maneuvering around each other, waiting for the other person to make the next move. We weren't caught in the endless cycle of push and pull. We were just two people, sitting in the same room, facing the truth. She nodded slowly, exhaling like she had been holding her breath for days. And then, in the quietest voice, she whispered, "I hear you." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Because this wasn't an automatic response. This wasn't manipulation or a knee-jerk attempt to steer the situation in her favor. This was real. In the days that followed, I watched her carefully. Not with skepticism, not with resentment, just observation. Because the truth was, words were easy. Promises were easy. But change, real change, that took effort. And for the first time, I saw it in her. She wasn't just throwing on a cute dress or making my favorite dinner to butter me up. She wasn't offering shallow compliments to see if she could lure me back into old patterns. She was actually trying. And that was the difference. I started noticing the changes in the little things first. She asked about my day, not just out of habit or obligation, but because she actually wanted to know. She listened, engaged, and followed up with real interest, not just nodding along while waiting for her turn to speak. She stopped rolling her eyes when I said no to something. Instead, she asked why, and for the first time, she actually considered my answer instead of dismissing it outright. It was different. It was real. And honestly, I appreciated it. But here's the thing. I didn't rush to meet her in the middle this time. That was the old me. The version of myself that had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to smooth things over just to make sure everything stayed comfortable. But I had learned my lesson. Love isn't supposed to feel like a transaction. Affection isn't something you should have to earn. And I wasn't going to play that game anymore. If Sienna truly wanted this marriage to work, then it had to be built on mutual respect. It couldn't be about her deciding when I was worthy of love, when I was allowed back in, when I had earned her attention again. That wasn't love. That was control. So I let her do the work. Not out of pettiness, not as some kind of revenge, but because I needed to know if she was serious. If this wasn't just another tactic to get me back under her thumb. And to my surprise, she was serious. She didn't withhold intimacy as a weapon anymore. She didn't ice me out when she didn't get her way. She didn't try to manipulate the situation by making me feel like I had to prove my worth over and over again. Because she had finally understood, our relationship wasn't about control. It was about partnership. But for me, the biggest shift wasn't in her. It was in me. I had learned to value myself. To recognize that I deserved to be in a relationship where I didn't have to beg for basic love and respect. I had never wanted to leave Sienna. I loved her. I had always loved her. But I also refused to be manipulated again. And because I had drawn that line, because I had refused to go back to the old cycle, our marriage actually became better. Not perfect, because no relationship ever is. But real. No more games. No more punishments. No more silent treatments, power struggles, or walking on eggshells. Just two people who had finally learned how to love each other the right way. And let me tell you, standing up for myself, that was the best decision I ever made. Now, I know this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Every relationship is different. Every dynamic has its own layers, its own complications. But if you're in a situation where someone is constantly holding affection over your head like a reward, I want you to ask yourself something. Is this really love? Or is it control? Because the truth is, when someone truly loves you, they won't treat intimacy like a paycheck you only get if you behave exactly the way they want. They won't make you feel like love is something you have to earn. So now, I want to hear from you. What do you guys think? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Do you think I handled it the right way? Or would you have done something differently? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.